Arguably one of the most iconic guitar amplifiers in history is the Marshall 1959 Super Lead, otherwise known as a Marshall Plexi. These are incredible amps, very sought after, used by a very wide array of players over the years. No need to list off everybody who's used them. And I'm sure no one's going to argue that they aren't just incredible amps. So I recently did a video on my channel comparing the Helix to the Marshall Studio series, sort of the mini shrunken down versions of some Marshall classics. And the one I had is right here by my side, which is the JCM 800 lead series, or the Studio Classic. And we were comparing that to the 2204. It wasn't really a fair comparison. The 2204 in the Helix is known for not having a bright cap, but it was quite easy to dial these in to get them to sound a little bit closer. Well, I loved that JCM 800 so much that I actually got my hands on this, which is basically the Mini Plexi, or the Studio Vintage. Now, the JCM 800 version, the Studio Classic, I have only the head version, but with the Vintage, or the Plexi version, I have the 110 combo. It has the same direct output that is unemulated. Now, there was a source of confusion with this in my last video. The direct output in the manual of the Marshall say that they're speaker emulated. They are not. The manual is incorrect, it seems. Even the official demo videos that Marshall put out, the person demoing makes a very specific point to say that they are unemulated so that you can use your own impulse responses or speaker models on them. So I just wanted to clear that up before I get a whole lot more comments concerning that issue. So this is a great little amp. I've had the opportunity to mess around with it in the day or so that I've had it, and I'm blown away by the authenticity of the Plexi sounds you can get out of it, even though it's a shrunken down version and only running at 20 watts. Marshall claims that they've really done their best to recreate the magic of the original amps. So the methodology today, to kind of just take it for fun, this is nothing serious, just to say, how is the Brit Plexi model within the Helix compared to a real amp? And I wish I had the real thing here, the real 1959 Super Lead 100, but unfortunately I don't. But I thought this would be kind of a neat close comparison. Just see how close, how in the ballpark these two amps are. I'm going to use a little different methodology today. I actually have a universal audio aux box here that is acting as the load for the Marshall Studio Vintage. So I don't have to have this raging volume in the room tearing my face off. Even though this is a 20 watt amp, it is very, very loud. You do have the ability to switch it down to 5 watts also. It's still very, very loud. You don't want to be sitting with it right next to you cranking this up. So the universal audio aux box is going to help me with this. All I'm doing is taking the DI unemulated out of the Marshall, and I've plugged it into a return on my Helix set to line. And then I've inserted that return along with the Marshall models in the Helix, the Marshall Plexi models to be exact. The Brit Plexi Norm, the Brit Plexi Bright, and the Brit Plexi Jump. That's a mouthful to say. And I've added the stock 412 cab, the new cabs that we got with 3.5. So they're all feeding the exact same cab to reduce the number of variables involved. But I want to give a little disclaimer here. Like I made in the last video, it didn't prevent me from getting some really idiotic comments from some folks anyways. It seems like that's the thing to do these days. But anyways, these are two different amps. I don't expect them to sound the same. I don't necessarily expect them to behave the same. This is just a fun little experiment to see how close they are at the same settings, and then what we have to do to kind of dial them in to different settings to get them even closer. But I don't have any expectation that these amps are going to sound identical. They shouldn't. They're completely different amps. I said that a million times in the last video. The reason I say it a million times is because there's always people out there who have to come on with ridiculous comments and try to cause problems. I'm not going to get involved in any of that. This is just a fun little experiment to see how these two amp models compare. So without further ado, let's head over to HX Edit, take a look and listen to the results of comparing the Helix version to this wonderful little Marshall box. So today I am playing my Gibson Les Paul Standard 60s. I thought it would be the right thing to do to play a Gibson while plugged into a Marshall Plexi. So here we have 4 snapshots, and just what I've kind of described to you already. I have Plexi Norm, and you'll notice all the other amp models are disengaged. There's the return, which is going to represent the real amp. And that's set with a little volume boost. I needed it to be boosted up to match the other amps a little bit. The mix obviously set to 100%, so I don't have any dry signal coming through. But you'll notice those are all disengaged. The Plexi norm on snapshot 1 is engaged. When I switch to Brit Bright, I go to the Bright model. Everything else is disengaged. When I go to Plexi Jump, you'll notice that the Jump model is engaged. And then when I go to Real Amp, all of the amp blocks are disengaged and only the return block is engaged. So basically, listening to this at these settings, everything on 5, that's what we have. Now, if I switch over to the Real Amp, and you can see the settings of the Real Amp up on the screen as well. Now, if we look at the Real Amp settings, everything is also set on 5, just like this version of the Plexi. Now, you'll notice also on the amp that I am plugged into the high sensitivity input for the normal channel. So I am guessing that the folks at Line 6 modeled these plugged into the high sensitivity input. I'm just guessing that. I have no way of knowing. But anyways, when we switch to compare the Bright channel, I will have to go physically unplug it, and the Jump, I will have to add another cable in, jumping the two channels together. But let's start here. So what did you hear here? Here's the Real Amp again. I'm trying to have the volumes matched as closely as possible. I don't actually have meters to do that with in this particular informal setting, but we'll try our best so that we aren't getting skewed or swayed by the volume difference. Maybe a little more gain and sizzle to the Plexi on the Helix. If I go over to the amp and maybe crank some treble and presence into it. Much thinner now, needs some bottom end. A lot more tubbiness, shall we say, on the Marshall Plexi model in the Helix. Maybe we'll pull that bass down. You'll notice that's changed the volume balance a bit. I'll give this model a little more. And as always, take a look up here to see what you're listening to at any moment on where the snapshot is. Real Amp versus the Brit norm. Not exact by any means, and like I said, and I'm probably going to say a million more times because somebody will comment, I'm not trying to get these exact. I don't think it's possible. They are completely different amps, but very, very much the same vibe between them. How about we do this? Before we switch to another model, let's just dime everything and see what this sounds like in that sort of classic dimed position. Let's see what our volume level is like. I don't necessarily like that setting unless we do other things to kind of counteract some of that fizz. But let's go do the same thing to the real amp. Much nicer results from the real amp, but I think that could simply be rectified with the Helix version by pulling maybe the treble and the presence back. So very different results, as would be expected if we have them all at the same setting. I would never suggest comparing two different amp models at the same settings because you're obviously going to get different results. All right, kind of cool. Just showing what the differences are. We can see with the Brit Plexi in the Helix that seems to have a little bit more sizzle to it, a little more bottom end, and maybe that sizzle is giving the impression of more gain as well. Let's switch over to the bright channel. And again, let's do this. Let's start with our settings just all at 5. Again, not the way we would want to do it to see if these sound the same, but just to sort of get a feel for what the differences are. Seems to be a little more bottom end on the Helix model. Again, a lot more bass response, it seems, on the Helix version. So again, you see with some tweaks, we get very different settings, but we get much closer results. Again, nothing that's going to be even close to exact, but very cool. I think this shows that the Helix version is actually doing a pretty solid job of getting some great Plexi tones going. All right, let's move over to the jump model. We'll start off with everything set the same. That real amp sounds very sweet there. Something very nice and kind of creamy about that. Again, there's a certain sizzle to the Helix version. Let's crank up both of the volumes to max. All right, so what are your thoughts? Obviously, like I said, and I'm going to say again, it still won't stop the ridiculous comments that will likely come in because people don't listen or watch all the time, but like to make comments even though they don't watch. Very strange stuff. But these are completely different amps. This is a new version of what Marshall is trying to recreate the magic of the original Plexi, but in a shrunken down, lower wattage package. I think they've done a beautiful job, but is it going to compare directly to an original Super Lead? I doubt it, and I think that this kind of shows that. Two different versions of the exact same amp are going to sound different for various factors. So I have a feeling if we had the actual model that the folks at Line 6 used to model the Brit Plexi versions in the Helix, we would probably notice it's a lot closer than this. But people seem to enjoy these comparisons. I thought it would be fun. There's nothing meant by this other than some enjoyment, some fun, and to maybe quench some curiosity that folks have when we like to compare real amps to the digital world. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I don't have any conclusions from this other than what I've already talked about. out. This was fun to do and always fun to mess with these comparisons. Thank you guys so much for sharing your time with me. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some enjoyment or you sort of watching it. And also please subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.